Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, just on the broader question, the turbocharging farm returns. First of all, could I pay tribute to Moore Park, Pat Dillon and his team, specifically Brian McCarthy in charge of scientists in charge of Clonakilty, Fergal Collins, super farm manager, will say that Michael Egan, scientist overseeing the Moore Park clover work. And also to thank Brian McCarthy for wading through what I'm going to say here today, and every time we went through it, he improved it. And also my thanks to Padraig French for guiding me through the intricacies of ICBF figures and replacements, culls, the carryovers, etc. And in particular, again, to Lauren Shalhoub will say that for absolute pleasure to work with, and the economic analysis there is almost all of it is Lawrence's, will say, from various experiments carried out on Moore Park. Is it possible to lift profits hugely, even on our top performing farms? And the answer is yes. And I'm suggesting the top 10% of farmers with Holstein Friesian on grass per 100 hectares, something like 60 to 90,000 euros per year profit, extra profit, every year, money in your pocket. What makes the difference? Combining two things: grass plus clover swards and crossbreds, as distinct, will say, from Friesian Holsteins just in grass alone. Just very quickly to refer to one or two of the issues. Bloat, will say, definitely has to be managed. It's a risk. But if you look at the Clonakilty figures, 0.6% cow mortality per year, it's a very manageable risk. And no very good information on bloat control, will say that, and the skills. Listening, if we listen to the Moore Park and the Clonakilty guys, the skills will be very quickly learned to manage bloat. And a note of caution will say that anything I'm saying, clover, it may not be suitable for heavy soils. I actually believe very heavy soils and heavy rainfall areas, my personal belief is that it's not suitable. Just for confirmation, I'm going to have a look at some of the New Zealand type stuff, and I'm going to bring that in as well. New Zealand has been working with clover for donkeys for decades, and we'll say that in terms of nutrients, clover is actually more sensitive to lack of nutrients than grass. So sometimes we'll say that is not understood. And in particular, I just highlight PKS and lime, but of the main ones, P and lime perhaps the most important. But also clover, there's some micronutrients, total of about 16 nutrients in total, and magnesium and molybdenum are quite important. High N inhibits clover, will say that even though Clonakilty at 250 kgs of N under superb management that hasn't happened, but on average it will. So in New Zealand, recommend under 200 kgs of N per hectare. Clover content yearly average, and it fluctuates during the year. Low at the start, high, will say, in summertime, and down again in winter. But on average needs to be plus 20% to get the kind of return we're talking about. Clover and grass, will say that in a high-end situation in New Zealand, get about a 12% extra dry matter versus grass alone. Very consistent with Clonakilty. As you would expect in a low-end situation, you get a much higher response, plus 42. Looking at Clonakilty over 3 years, grass and clover versus grass. Increase in yield, average 1.5 tonnes per hectare. Lower fibre, which is important. Lower residuals. The cows they are happy to graze tighter, 3.9 average for the year, as distinct from 4.4 centimetres. You will get a bigger response on depleted soils, that's low organic type soils or low fertility soils. After tillage would be a good example. But worth pointing out, will say that that 90% of our soils, will say that are deficient in one or more major nutrients. It has a lower effect on permanent grassland with high organic matter that has been well farmed and has a very high nutrient status, such as Moore Park. And again, just broadly, we'll say nutrient value of good clover swards. In particular, clover holds its digestibility over a longer grazing period and is particularly good, we'll say that, in the May-June sort of period when grass may just get a little bit stemmy. Again, looking at more complete results, just want to look at total dry matter production, the two on the left, tetraploid and diploid grass alone, 15.6, 15.4, averaging, very respectable results, averaging 15.5. And the two on the right, tetraploid plus clover, diploid plus clover, averaging 17. So hence the lift of 1.5. And the clover content, over 2 of the years was 25.8% on average and 27.9% on average. And if that doesn't sound too high, I just put in the cautionary note, farmers generally hugely overestimate the amount of clover in their paddocks. So kind of as a rule of thumb, whatever you think it is, divide by 2 and you're probably getting pretty close. Throwing in Moore Park and Clonakilty results now, not just Clonakilty. You need lower bag end fixation effect, as you'd expect. It's good on climate change. Factor X, raising efficiency of pasture conversion to animal protein. That's within the animal. Y will say grass sward that takes about 12 hours to break down on the rumen. A grass clover sward that if there's 30% clover in it, as you would often get in midsummer, it only takes 6 to 8 hours to break down in the rumen. So faster passage through the digestive system, suggesting to the cow, when they feel emptier, they feel hungrier. So it stimulates higher cow intakes. Nutrient values of grass clover swards, Clonakilty analysis. Crude protein is generally higher. Probably just want to draw attention to the NDF, neutral detergent fibre, that 50 to 44. That is significant, we'll say, that lower fibre aids the faster passage effect, we'll say that. And a figure that's not on it. Generally, clover is about 4% lower in dry matter than grass. If we look, we'll say that at this one, if we start here, no difference in spring growth, huge differences in midsummer, 15 kgs a day here. Once you get out to here, we'll say they converge again. And then we'll say that undesirably, we'll say that grass clover growth is a good bit lower to date than just grass alone, hence creating a bit of a spring hole, which isn't desirable. We'll say that if you have to feed with silage at a time of high workload. So difference in per cow production, been very consistent across Clonakilty, 58 kgs of milk solids and grass plus clover versus grass. Same input of nitrogen and meal across all treatments. Same stocking rate at 2.7 cows per hectare. For experimental reasons, we'll say that nitrogen is not changed and so on. Looking at the actual figures on grass alone, in a low input system, 427, very respectable. And again, in a low input system, 485 will say that average, will say that across the 3 years. Super performance, a difference of 58 kgs. Difference in per cow sales, taking here an average price of 31 cents, so you can adjust that up or down as you see fit. The 262 will say the per cow multiplied by 2.75, 720 per hectare. Extra costs due to grass and clover 2016 in Clonakilty. The extra silage fed, 200 kgs, has been the average figure. About 150 kgs of that fed in the springtime, noting that that's at a time of high workload. So that's a significant cost. 2016 was a very low bloat threat year, 10. Extra clover seed worked over 7 years. Extra work feed and silage, and mortality was nil. 46 euros a cow. Probably comment will say that for anybody starting with clover will say that the initial costs would probably be higher. So this is probably more a status quo situation. Once you've learned that once you're not putting once you're only putting in chloronics when you think it's a dangerous situation, as you get more skilled. In the earlier years, we'll say that probably would be putting in more chloronics. Probably comment just on the extra silage, we'll say that as the Moore Park Clonakilty staff are getting more skilled in terms of managing clover, we'll say that this is likely to reduce, we'll say, and The difference in growth rate over the 60 or 80 deep winter days, this year it's much lower than it has been previously. The extra benefits from grass clover, the Clonakilty, so a net €594 per hectare in the Clonakilty situation. In Moore Park, we'll say, well, the percentage clover has tended to be less, and it was stitched in rather than a complete sowing, we'll say. The lesser effect, we'll say, in mature dairy pastures at Moore Park, high organic matter, giving a lower kick on like from clover. Soils that there's lots of nitrates in already. So on average, something like 29, 30 kgs of milk solids, which is half the Clonakilty figure. Value of 351 and 100 kgs less of N, we'll say that a saving of about €79, so 430. So about 150, 160 lower than the Clonakilty figure. The best kept secret in dairying, food conversion efficiency, are there major breed differences? And the answer is hell yes. Off to Dairy NZ research just for a sec. Breed at 1,500 residuals, and that's a total cover, which is equivalent to 0, we'll say that in Tagus scores, we'll say, so very tight grazing. Jersey Hill, on New Zealand figures, will take in 4% of body weight, crossbred, 50% crossbred, 3.6, Holstein Friesian, the surprisingly low 2.8%, and for maintenance, they calculate the Holstein Friesian on a low input system. 44% of feed goes for maintenance, and the crossbred 38%. And following on from that, again in low input grass systems, 56% of feed sort of being partitioned for production, and crossbred 62. That will say that if you're growing 16 or 15, 16 tons, it's about a 10.75% benefit going for productive purposes. You don't sell grass that you grow, you don't sell grass that you eat, you only sell the grass that goes actually for productive purposes. And it's equivalent to about 1.25, 1.5 tons of extra grass eaten per hectare for production. So Moore Park findings on the percentage intake per body weight. Jersey 3.99, similar to New Zealand. Crossbred 3.63, and the Holstein Friesian 3.39, which is probably, we'll say, more what I would have expected. So in this case, the crossbred, it's 7% higher in terms of body weight intake versus the Holstein Friesian. On the right of the slide there, that's from the last slide, and I just put it in. That's input as a percentage of body weight, and this is output now, in the sense we're now production of solids converted milk per 100 kgs of body weight. And we'll say the figures 4.3, and the reason I put these up is, we'll say, you get a substantial lift in the Jersey stage from the inputs to the outputs, 3.9 and going to 4.3. Again, you get a pretty similar lift, we'll say, that going from the crossbreds 3.63 to 3.95, and in the case of, we'll say, that the Holstein Friesians, you don't get that lift, virtually nothing there. And noting that, analysing that, crossbred plus 15% more feed conversion efficient than the Holstein Friesian. So we'll check that later as we in other ways. So this is just thrown in, we'll say, that in terms of, have there been any significant results, we'll say, that in terms of breeds, or clover versus grass in terms of reproduction. And if you look, we'll say, the submission, crossbred's good, the Holstein Friesian superb, pregnant to first service, Holstein Friesians good, the crossbreds off the scale at almost 75. 6 weeks pregnancy, excellent in both cases, again the crossbreds that bit ahead, and the empty rate are highly respectable. So there are no significant, there aren't any reproduction problems. So what's missing in the Clonakilty experiment to make it even more valuable to farmers? And it is still a wonderful experiment. Certainly, I think the most meaningful experiment in the 50-odd years since I've got involved in this wonderful industry. And I would suggest need to measure per hectare, not per cow. Why so? When the cows on a hectare only cost about 1/6 of the hectare, then I think it's per hectare measurements, in terms of as a business, are the most relevant ones. Brian McCarthy broke down the Clonakilty figures. What's the feed conversion of the different breeds in Clonakilty on grass and grass clover, and are there major differences? Results 2014 to 16. And just before we interpret this slide, a good target sort of figure is in a low input system is to get 80% milk solids per percentage body weight. And if we look, we'll say that the crossbreds a little bit ahead, 12 kgs. Crossbreds a little bit lighter, 49 kgs. And we'll say that and the Holsteins coming in at a very respectable figure of 81%. And that is a good performance by any standards. But when you look at the kgs, on the crossbred on grass alone, 92%. Again, we'll say the crossbred, 13.6 more feed conversion efficient than the Holstein Friesian cow on grass. So let's flick on. We'll say that grass plus clover. Again, we'll say that in terms of milk solids, pretty close again. The crossbred's a little bit ahead, 10 kgs. By the way, you'll notice both of them are a good bit higher. The cows, in both cases, are heavier than just in grass alone. And better fed on grass plus clover. But in this case, there's a 54 kg difference. We'll say that, the kgs of milk solids per 100 kgs of body weight, the Holstein Friesians on grass clover coming in at 91%. Super performance, absolutely super performance. But it's when you get to the crossbred on grass clover, 103% on a low input system is literally off the scale. This is like Usain Bolt now, running 9:58. This is world record type stuff. The crossbred plus 12% more feed conversion efficient than the Holstein Friesian cow on grass clover. But the relevant comparison for the industry is, we'll say that what's the industry mostly doing? It's Holstein Friesian, plus 90% on grass. It's probably plus 90% of the industry. And, and under very good management, 81%. And the crossbred on grass plus clover, 103%. There's a plus 27% when you put the two of them together for the crossbred plus clover. It's a massive effect, absolutely massive. And it is 100% system effect, given that they're under the same management. Thanks. Now, getting on to results, and thanks to Lawrence for these figures. And these are extracted from Moore Park, from Clonakilty, from Ballydaig, we'll say that from Curtains. And probably we'll say that there's a lot of figures. I just want to point out a few things. First of all, the number of hectares, across the 4 treatments, grass only, Holstein Friesian crossbred, the grass clover, Holstein and crossbred. The number of hectares is the same in each case. So if we just look for a minute on grass only and come down to the number of cows calving, and we'll say that the differences in stocking rate, it's actually based on Moore Park input, the records of inputs, how much cows eat, you can actually only stock at 5 cows extra, which is probably less than people might have anticipated. So roughly 0.1 will say that difference in stocking rates. The same difference over here. But interestingly, grass clover, even though you're actually going to grow more more total production, of grass and clover than grass only, you notice actually that the number of cows in each case have actually declined. So there's 6 cows less, even though there's more grass to graze. How to reconcile that one? And this is interesting. Just look for a minute at grass and silage as eaten, we'll say, by the Holstein Friesian. Over here, 34.91 and 1.209. That's 4.7 tons plus meal, we'll say that. But 4.7 tons, about 5 tons in total being eaten. Flick over here to the Holstein Friesian, add these, and it's 5.175. So it's and add in the meal. So there's roughly 450 kgs extra eaten by the Holstein Friesian when they're on grass clover and the same amount of meal than if they were on grass. So that you can actually stock less cows, even though you're growing more grass. And but then you need to notice, because this extra feed will say, what does it give you? There's just stay with the Holstein Friesian for a minute. There's a substantial lift in yield, similar effect with the crossbred. So less work, fewer cows, but much higher milk sold. So again, you can start to see the ones on the right selling roughly 10% more milk than the ones on the left, even though there's fewer cows here. And now there's lots of figures, I'm not going to go through all of them. And the sort of the key ones at 29.5 cents, kind of an intermediate price. The difference in farm profitability, I'm just going to compare the Holstein Friesian on grass versus the crossbred, we'll say that on grass clover.
The green button is easier seen about.
Okay. And there's actually a difference in this case of the 534 euros per hectare. Going to a higher price, maybe an optimistic price. In this case, we'll say the difference, it goes up a bit more, we'll say that, and it goes to 662 per hectare. But let's flick on a bit. There's, by the way, all those figures now are allowances. The experiment is only running for 3 years to date. So a 15% replacement rate has been used for both breeds by Lawrence. Obviously, this will change. And it's a plus or minus 38 euros per hectare change in profit for every 1% change in replacement rate. Moore Park and Lawrence, quite rightly, do not actually predict what the replacement rate is likely to be on this. So, but from experience, we'll say that that crossbreds and whatever, the Moore Park can't extrapolate. As a farmer, I can extrapolate, and probably the hardest thing, we'll say that, and the thing that I consulted most with different people, within Moore Park was what would be fair to actually take as the likely difference in replacement rates. And what we eventually settled on was based on Frank Buckley's work in Ballydaig, the strain trial. The crossbreds, under the same management, same conditions, were a 19% replacement rate, and the Holstein Friesian at 26% replacement rate. When I compared them, we'll say, with the actual, what's actually happening on farms, that is in line with the kind of feedback I'd actually get, we'll say. So if you think a 7% difference in replacement rate is too much, 1 or 2%, too much, then just adjust as you see fit. So using those figures, looking again at an intermediate price, 29.5 cents, grass only, and we'll say that, first of all, we'll say just look at the breed effect. On grass only, 1487 to 1855. So quite a substantial breed effect. Again, look at grass clover, just the breed effect, 1939 to 2288. So substantial breed effect. But then look at, we'll say, just the clover effect, 1487 to 1939. Actually an even bigger effect, and the crossbred the same. But it gets really interesting when you actually look at the Holstein Friesian on grass, which is the industry, 1487, as against the crossbred on grass clover, 2288, plus 800 euros a hectare, a 54% jump in profits at a sort of a middle range of prices. Now, just checking a wee bit for figures will say that, different milk price. Crossbred, the crossbred versus sorry, that's slightly labelled wrong. It's the crossbred on grass clover versus the Holstein Friesian on grass. At 24.5 cents, it's plus 673. It's a lift of 98%. And if you can actually find a better protection against volatility, it is quite remarkable. At 29.5 cents, as we said, 54%. At 34.5 cents a litre, the lift in profits 928 plus 40%. So extra profits, it's a massive difference. Our competitive advantage, it is a game changer. Yes, but only if we act on it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think I'll invite up Brian and Michael. I was going to go Brian and Brian. So Brian McCarthy, part of the Clonakilty, or the man that you've mentioned as regards the Clonakilty clover experiment. And Michael, who's seen some of this in action out at farm level. So you decide who to share up the questions to when it comes up. I'll throw them out to you. So, okay, keep those badminton players active. Put up your hands and we'll get the microphone to you ahead of time if we can. In the middle. Oh. Okay. Down the back, ready to go. Go.
Tom Mallison, Dorset, UK. Obviously, there's a reduction in nitrogen fertiliser on the grass clover. So is that a general reduction across the year, or should that nitrate be targeted to certain times of the year on the grass clover sward?
So I'll just, on the Clonakilty experiment, we have spread the same amount of nitrogen across both the grass only and the grass clover treatments. And that's purely kind of, at the start of the experiment, we wanted to look at introducing clover into a high stocking rate system with high levels of nitrogen and to see what would happen and would the clover survive. In terms of reducing nitrogen fertiliser application rates and things like that, I might pass you over to Mike because his experiment in Moorpark has looked at that more so than mine.
Yeah, so I was involved in an experiment in Moorpark and something similar to the Clonakilty, looking at clover and non-clover swards, but on one of the clover treatments we wanted to see, by reducing nitrogen fertiliser, what effect would it have by keeping stocking rate and concentrate similar. So we reduced nitrogen fertiliser by 100 kilos, so from 250 to 150 kilos per hectare. Similar, at the same stocking at 2.74, we grew the same amount of grass by reducing our nitrogen fertiliser by 100 kilos compared to our grass-only sward at 250 kilos. And our clover swards with the high nitrogen grew about 900 kilos more. But on top of that, we also measured nitrogen fixation and nitrate leaching as well, and I have the results for the first 3 years of that. So we have found no difference so far in nitrate leaching between either of the three systems, with both high nitrogen and one with reduced level of nitrogen. And when we look at nitrogen fixation on top of that, when we included clover in the system with a high level of fertiliser, what actually happened is the clover used the chemical fertilisers the same way as the grass does, just slower. So we were only fixing about 20 units of nitrogen per year at 250 kilos of nitrogen. But when we reduced our nitrogen fertiliser to 100 kilos less, our clover kicked in and fixed much more nitrogen, and it fixed about 110 kilos of nitrogen per year per hectare. So when we look at the total nitrogen that we put into the system, with fertiliser and with biological fixation, it was the same on both treatments. And that's why we didn't see a difference with leaching, and we found the differences in the similar herbage production, because overall nitrogen inputs was similar on all three treatments.
Just explain your fertiliser application strategy as well there, Mike.
So on the high nitrogen system, so the clover 250 system and the grass only with 250 kilos of nitrogen were the exact same and similar to what we applied in Clonakilty what was applied in Clonakilty as well. So we wanted to see, by including clover high nitrogen, can we grow the same amount of grass? So we kept fertilizer application the same as you would on a normal system. We applied half a bag urea in end of January, and then another bag urea in early March. So we wanted 70 units nitrogen out on that treatment by the 1st of April. And we did that on the 150 kilo treatment as well. So we still wanted that early nitrogen fertilizer out when we were in the early part of the year when the clover isn't actually fixing the nitrogen at that stage. But from the middle of May onwards on the clover 150 treatment, we effectively halved the amount of nitrogen that we applied for the remainder of the year, because at that stage we were confident we had enough clover in the system, we had greater than 25% in the sward, and we were confident that clover would kick in and fix the additional nitrogen that we required when we reduced the nitrogen. So we kept it the exact same for the first half of the year, and once we were confident that we had enough clover in the system, we effectively halved it for the remainder of the year up until the middle of September.
Lovely. Have we a question in the middle?
Good morning, it's Richard Smith from the UK. Under the grass clover system, you naturally open in the spring with a lower cover, and I just wondered what you would recommend the best way to manage that, whether you should fill that with supplement feed or look at maybe calving a little bit later to reduce your demand.
Yeah, so in our case in Clonakilty, what has happened is in the spring of 2015 and the spring of 2016, we've opened with an opening farm cover of approximately 250 kgs lower on the grass clover swards compared to the grass-only swards. And effectively, because we're keeping the same inputs in terms of concentrate supplementation, we maintain the same concentrate supplementation across all the treatments, and we fill the gap then with silage. And over the 2 years, over the 2 springs, that averaged out at about 150 kilograms of dry matter per cow, extra supplement that had to go in for the spring period, which is roughly around a bale of silage a cow. And that slide that Michael showed there of the grass growth rates, so basically we're getting the higher growth rates in the summer period, and effectively we're taking off more surpluses there. So we have the surpluses there to feed in the spring. So that's one point. The point about altering the calving date, I would agree with it to a certain extent, but going back to Brendan's talk yesterday about there is still that optimum kind of range in calving, mean calving date that you want to maintain, and in terms of having enough cows calved to get through the spring, and your compactness of calving is important as well. So there is maybe some bit of a leeway there, a couple of days, maybe 5-7 days, but I don't think you should be going too much away from where you would be normally calving.
Okay, lovely. Make sure to get your hands up beforehand. Michael, just while we're, yeah, and as chairman, I'd like to ask a question, so steady on now, steady on. Michael, you heard the answer. That's a joke, obviously. Yeah. You heard the answer that someone asked me earlier about where are we going as regards crossbreeding. So we've no problem from an EBI point of view putting in the jersey on the first black and white, but we're struggling at the minute because the gap between the best jerseys and the best genomic bulls is big. Any comment on that, or where do you go to after that first cross?
Well, first of all, we'll say that for the last number of years, we'll say we haven't actually been getting the best Jersey bulls into the country. And I'm delighted, we'll say that with a change in veterinary regulation, that will now be corrected. First point. Second point, we'll say that I think we'll say that genomics is potential. Profits are actually real. And in terms of the reality, I think the EBI system has done a wonderful job overall for the Irish dairy industries. I'm not at all critical of it. I think in terms of sorting out Holstein Friesians, it's been magnificent. I think it doesn't remotely include, if you like, the full feed conversion effects. So I'd respectfully suggest to ICBF and Moore Park that they might actually have a look at it. I actually believe, by the way, in terms of the labour demands of cows, will say that I actually believe that's another area the EBI could be tweaked a bit. Will say that. So in terms of genomics, certainly we'll say that genomics offers the possibility of faster progress. But in terms of the reality of actual profits, money in farmers' pockets, I think over the next 15 or 20 years, we'll say that I think the crossbred will be so far ahead that living in the real world of actual profits rather than future potential. I think for most farmers, unless you've an exceptionally good and fertile Friesian herd, will say that adopting a crossbred breeding strategy, I think, would substantially increase profits. Couple it with clover, and as I'm suggesting, I think on the right soil types, then I think you're turbocharging farm profits.
Super. Question here.
Hello, Andy Thornhill from UK. When you're reseeding, what percentage clover would you put in the mix? And also, the grass, is there any pros and cons to just having one variety of grass? Not a mixture of different varieties, just one single.
So in terms of the seeding rate, I've done work on different clover seed inclusion rates in grass seed mixtures, and a range of 1 kilo per acre up to 5 kilos per acre of different rates of clover seed included in that seed mix. After 6 months, the difference is quite small. There's no difference after 6 months. The most important thing is with the seed inclusion rate is that it's managed correctly afterwards. So what we would recommend is on a full reseed, you're probably talking about 1 kilo of clover seed per acre. And if you're stitching clover seed into an existing grass-only swards, you're probably looking at in the range of 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos per acre when you're stitching clover seed into a grass-only sward. But the biggest factor, it's very easy to put clover seed into a seed mix and put it into an existing sward. It's very easy to put it out. The problem is managing it correctly afterwards. 80% of all grass seed sold in Ireland has 0.5 kilo to 1 kilo of clover seed included in the seed mix. But yet when you go onto farms, the level of clover, whether wanted or not wanted, is extremely low. So what's happening on it is when you sow it, it's not being managed correctly afterwards. The major issue is not using the correct clover-safe sprays, non-clover-safe sprayers being used, and it's killing the clover, and then the pre-grazing herbage mass and the residuals post-management. So you can get an extremely successful clover establishment with 0.5 kilo if it's managed correctly, and you can put in 5 kilos of clover seed, but if you don't manage correctly, you won't get the accurate level. So the optimum level is probably in the range of 0.5 kilo to 1 kilo per acre, but it needs to be managed correctly post-sowing to get that good clover establishment and persistent long-term.
Right.
And I think there was a second point to that question in terms of cultivars as well. In terms of clover cultivars, we have used medium leaf cultivars in the experiments that we've been involved in both Moorpark and at Clonakilty, and my new work now on farms. Large leaf cultivars are probably not suited to an intensive grazing system in terms of the growth profile. They're very aggressive initially, and then they can take over large parts of the sward and then die out after 2 to 3 years. So large leaf cultivars are probably not applicable to a grazing scenario. We need to be moving towards a medium and a small medium leaf cultivars for grazing systems.
Okay, middle of the room, and then I'll come to the front.
Yeah, Philip O'Leary from Cork. So it's evident that there's benefit to be gained from grass clover pasture. So for a farm what is the panel's advice for a farm that is highly stocked, and keeping in mind what Lawrence is saying, trying to get there as quickly as possible to getting from limited clover in your pasture to where you want to be with clover pasture?
So in terms of doing it, so if you're going from if you're 100% of your grazing platform has no clover on at the moment, the quickest way, there's 2 ways you can put it in, is it a full reseed or stitching it in. It's probably not practical to go and fully reseed your entire farm in 1 year to put clover into the system. So that's probably not a practical way or financially viable way to do it. Stitching it in is probably the fastest and the cheapest way to getting a clover established within your farm and in your sward. In terms of doing that, how do you do it? It's very simple. You put the clover seed out into an existing grass sward and manage it accordingly afterwards. I already said what the seedling rate is. You're probably talking about 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos an acre of a stitching in. When to do it, you normally do it after an extremely tight grazing or after a surplus cut of paddock or surplus cut of bales to get that into it. But the management afterwards is extremely important. You need to keep your residuals lower than 1200 for the first 2, if not 3 grazings, and make sure that you graze it down to the 4 centimetres to ensure that that light gets down to the base of the sward to get it in. And if you can do that, the establishment of the clover in the system will be quite good, and it will be a cheap way of getting clover into it. Clover seed at the moment is probably in the range of €7 to €9 a kilo, and it probably, depending on the machine that you use, you're probably talking €1 to €2 an acre to sow it thereafter. So you're probably talking in the region of €13 to €15 an acre to put that clover seed out and get it growing on your farm, and then it's just management practices after that.
Lovely. Michael?
Yeah, when the ICBF database was being set up, we had a big debate at the board level about who could control the database. So I have a question for Mike Murphy. Now that it is controlled by the farmers, and now there is a suggestion that to use certain genetics, that we need to sign a form to limit the outcome of the use of those genetics. I want your view on signing contracts around use of genetics. And I also want your view on the ICBF levy and whether it's a good return for farmers to invest in ICBF through a levy.
Okay. Chairman, with your leave, could I ask, is there any LIC personnel present? Yeah, a couple, yeah. Well, I always do my best to stay clear of political sort of time bombs. No, but seriously, I want to respond. As somebody will say that Paddy O'Keefe and myself, way back in '77, they started using exclusively New Zealand semen. We were the first in these islands to do so. And since that period, I've bought almost nothing but LIC genetics. Almost certainly, will say that I've probably almost certainly the LIC has sold more semen to me than anybody else in the country over the 40 odd years. Plus, we'll say I've brought umpteen people to, Newstead, literally hundreds of people in my trips. So, by any standards, I'm a friend of LIC. Will say that. So, could I not asking you by the way for a response at the moment, could I very respectfully request that you would convey back to New Zealand to the senior management and the board a view, will say, of somebody who's a long-established, very good friend of the LIC, in the light, I feel like, of new information and everything else like that. Would it be possible for the LIC to reconsider its position? Because I think, we'll say, the intended course of action, I actually think would be a lose-lose situation. I think it would hit LIC sales very strongly. I think we'll say that it wouldn't obviously be good for the Irish dairy industry. And in the light of the circumstances, and including, we'll say, the changed circumstances now, the availability of much better Jersey bulls, will say that we now have access to the same Jersey bulls what New Zealand farmers are actually using. But also, will say that in light of the new information that this wonderful experiment in Clonakilty and Moore Park has actually thrown up, and I seriously consider there is a once-in-a-lifetime commercial opportunity open to the LIC over the next 2 or 3 years, not just to increase sales, but, we'll say, to actually multiply them, possibly by several times over. So, would it be possible for the board and management to maybe reconsider in the light of that, and that maybe change policy so that we can actually move to a win-win type situation? I would very respectfully request that you convey that to New Zealand, and will say that the second part of the question will say that ICBF will say levy has been good value to people. So the ICBF, I think, has been overall wonderful for the industry. So I mean, I think farmers should support it. Will say.
Tim, if you hold, I'll just go down to the middle and I'll come back. Tom.
The question I'd like to ask is, how do you control the clover in the sward? On a drier soil, if you get a very dry summer, the clover tends to take over. And I can envisage that if we got a couple of dry summers in a row, that I'd be 80 clover or 80 clover and 20 grass. So how do you limit what are you meant to do to keep the balance of the sward as described in Clonakilty?
Brian, yeah.
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple of things with that. I suppose really the kind of the optimum clover content we want in the swards is somewhere between 20 and 25% on average over the year. And what that means is then, like clover, the typical clover pattern, growth pattern in the sward starts off quite low in the sward in the spring and then increases to a peak of around maybe 40% in July, August, September. And really what we want is to keep that peak at that time less than 50%. We've had extremes in Moorpark, or in Clonakilty and in Moorpark to a lesser extent. But yes, there can be an issue on the drier soil types in getting very warm, very dry summers like we had in 2013 in Clonakilty especially, where the clover can take over and start to dominate, and you get these 80% clover sward, which is not what we want. A couple of ways to try and combat that is, number one, do not cut heavy cuts of silage off of those paddocks, because that will actually drive on the clover content even higher. And we made that mistake a few years, especially during 2013 and 2014. A couple of paddocks were stopped up for first and second cuts of silage, very heavy cuts. After the silage is cut, the ryegrass, the grass is yellow. Down at the base of the sward, it takes a couple of weeks to recover. Whereas you'll see the clover starting to recover very quickly because it has its own nitrogen supply. So that's number one. Do not cut heavy cuts of silage off those paddocks. If you do get if you're doing that and you're still getting clover contents that are too high, you can go with some sort of a non-clover, say, spray at a half rate or something like that to try and check the swards. Now, we haven't done that ourselves in Moorpark, but we have heard of anecdotally that is happening to some degree out on farm to try and control. But I suppose the key thing is, if you see swards starting to creep up in clover content, to try and take action then and not leave it develop to some of the extremes that we have seen in Clonakilty anyway. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
I'd just like to add one small little point to that. So what has happened in Clonakilty, it has been come from long-term tillage to previously, and on your own farm as well, Andrew, that your farm was long-term tillage in Kilkenny before that happened. So what happens there is the organic matter is extremely low in the soil. So to put the clover in there, it's extremely beneficial. But you do need to be vigilant that on those type of soils, you don't need the kilo and 2 kilos of clover seed of a seeding rate. You will get away with a half a kilo, and then your grazing management after that will help it. But again, as Brian said, the silage is definitely extremely important. But particularly on those low organic soils, you can get away with a slightly lower seeding rate.
Yeah, I'm running this so well. I've been told by the organisers we're going to cancel lunch. We're going to just keep going right through to 2 o'clock. I'll take 2 more. Tim.
Thanks, Chairman. A couple of points. This is a fantastic session. It really is. Anybody that can put figures up and tell us we can make that much extra money out of cows is great. There's a couple of downsides to it. In my opinion, this grass clover is the third development now by Moorpark that is of very significant value to Irish dairy farmers. Yet Mike put a figure up there a while ago where 91% of the cows are still Holstein Friesian in Ireland, after 10 years of results on the strain trials and that sort of thing. The grass budgeting that Lawrence talks about and that everybody else talks about driving on growth, how many are doing it? Yeah, how many are doing it in Ireland? Minuscule numbers if you're honest about it. And I would suspect that with the grass clover now, we'll see the same thing. Great ideas, great stuff. How do we get it outside of this room? We're preaching to the converted in here, and it's a general question to the senior members of the panel, and I suppose I'll put it like that. That's the first point. The second question is to yourself, Chairman. In the earlier discussion, you mentioned that you're now finding it difficult to continue using Jersey crossing with Jerseys. In the light of the feed efficiency conversion and stuff like that, are you changing your mind on that? And the third one is to Lawrence then, in that with these figures, and I'm sure they're right, how can we evaluate and measure that and get some understanding out there to people? where's the cow's own worth, this cow individual index gone, or is it ever going to appear from ICBF? And, you know, it's fine to have the theory. It must be really frustrating to guys doing good research to see lots of good stuff come up and the uptake so poor. So I'm not negative. We're going to fly from in here, from what we've got. I'm more interested in how we can get our neighbours and our other, even at discussion group meetings, the number of people that are prepared to take on this, and you'd expect they're the people that are interested in expanding, even at discussion group meetings. It's so low on the uptake that it's really worrying, and, you know, I'd like to hear how we can get this out.
Lawrence will give me a chance to think if you...
Yeah. Well, no, just to hit a few of the points, and Tim, I'm not, I agree with 100% of what you're saying. I'd be a little bit more positive in terms of, if we look at grass utilisation, and we've tracked this since 2008, just in terms of the National Farm Survey, we've increased grass utilisation by about a tonne, on average, over that period. A tonne by 600,000 hectares is worth roughly close to 100 million euros per year on farm. So absolutely, we're not getting 17,000 dairy farmers measuring grass, but we are having impact in terms of there is technology being taken up. Obviously, it's not fast enough, and the guys that are in this room are taking it up faster than the rest, right? And but I wouldn't be as negative to say that there's nothing happening in terms of in that sense. That's the first thing. Second thing is in the cow index. Cow index was developed from a research point of view, I suppose, a number of years ago, 2 years ago now it was published. So it's there, but there is a bit of work to get it running off the ICBF system. I don't think, for me, and I was involved in the cow index, I don't think the cow index is going to, it'll help you to evaluate your own herd, but for me, it's not to be all and end all in terms of crossbreeding. For me, the big thing is getting genomics into the jerseys so that we have increasing the jerseys at the same speed. That's what we have to do. There's a lot of debate around, feed efficiency and all that. To be fair, we have feed efficiency and we have live weight in the index in a fairly strong way since 2007. The economic value for carcass weight at the moment, live weight in essence, is something like €1.50 in terms of the economic value. So, we're planning to have an industry discussion in terms of what needs to be done in the dairy index in the next week. And I don't see a huge change in relation to the economic value for live weight per se. There's nothing massively has changed. We went to a land limiting scenario in 2007. What happens is when you increase the live weight of an animal in the index today, from an economic value point of view, we have to buy in additional feed, and that additional feed is coming in at 180 or 190 euros per tonne of dry matter. So the economic value per se for live weight, I don't see changing very much. What I think could happen is maybe that we'll get a better predictor of live weight coming from genetic evaluations, and that is something that's planned, and it's something that will probably happen very soon in terms of where we're going. But for me, the big thing is to increase the speed of genetic gain of the jerseys as fast as the Holstein Friesians, and if we do that, there's, the index, we're in huge positive territory.
To address what you said to me, yeah, without getting into the technicalities, you understand what I mean by we can justify the first cross, because we're getting the full 100% crossbreeding effect, and then we start dropping it down. And the gap between the current jerseys and the best genomic has been too big to justify the next one. Definitely listen to some of the things which maybe should be incorporated more into the EBI, which would start closing the numbers game. It'll make us rethink. But if I go back a minute, the people that started using jersey first did not use it because of EBI. I remember someone back in West Cork that started using jersey, and I did my absolute best to persuade him he was wrong. I'll be honest, I said you can get everything you're going to get by using black and white New Zealand Friesian. Do not use jersey. He didn't listen to me. He crossed with jerseys. So the people that, and he was right, that's the obvious point. But the people that did it at the start, it wasn't EBI that was driving them. They had seen the cows on farms, they had some of them on their own, and they saw what they were delivering on the ground. And if I was farming myself and I wasn't constrained by science and the organisation I'm working with, I would have no hesitation in putting jersey back on top of that Jersey Friesian cross. As crude as this, if she was too big, she'd get a jersey. If she was small, she'd get a Friesian. But the science isn't allowing me doing that, I suppose, at the moment. Had we
Chairman, a question there for Brian and Mike. In Clon, according to Mike's figures there, it's nearly €600 of benefit. In Moore Park, it's 428. And if you bring that onto farm level, what kind of figures realistically you think they'll be? And also, if to bring it onto farm level, what percentage of clover swards do you think a farmer should have? Should it be 80% or 70% or the full whack? Also, how much has the clover depleted in both Clon and Moore Park in the 3 years up to now? And bloat, that's going to be the biggest challenge on farm. Is there any advances in an easier way of administering bloat to cows? Because that's going to be the biggest challenge, obviously. And lastly, differently, but just a comment on the EBI issue, just to say, look, ICBF has done tremendous work in bringing EBI where it is today, but what I will say is, what I feel and what a lot of farmers feel is that ICBF appears to be courting AI companies in chasing EBI, and unfortunately, that's what farmers are looking for, but it's not doing justice to farmers, I feel.
Okay, so just as regards to the first point was on farm and how do we get this on, and it kind of ties in what Tim had said in the previous question as well. How do we, I understand 100% the uptake of clover thus far has been quite low. It is beginning to change from what I've been dealing with in farmers in the last 6 months to a year, and similar to Brian. Last April, 12 months, I was involved in setting up an on-farm program. So we now have 8 farms across the country that we have sown clover into those swards. We're hoping to another 8 this year and build on it year on year. So we are getting it out on farm now through a Teagasc program. We're evaluating clover on these commercial farms. I said we have 8 farms at the moment, and we're hoping to build that on a year-on-year basis. And they are across the country, so we are getting in geographical locations, soil types, stocking rates as well, and different managements. In regards to how much do we do, what we have done on those farms is we have oversown 75% of the milking platform. If they have silage coming off of their milking platform, their first and second good silage, as Brian already said it in the management, we have not put clover into those paddocks. And as relation then to if they don't, we have still kept that to 75% of the milking platform that we have targeted to put clover into the swards. So that is the level that we have done on those farms, and we have gone out 1.5 kilos. And thus far, the establishment has been very, very good. There has been 1 or 2 paddocks that failed, but the establishment has been quite good, and we'll see more this year of how that is progressing. And where we want those farms to be at is somewhere close to the 20-22% average across the year, peaking at around this 40% mark. Yeah. That's not going to be for 18 months because of the method that we've done it in terms of stitching it in. In regards, how much of that 60 kilos of milk solids and 40 kilos in Moore Park are they going to get? I would imagine on farm it's probably going to be somewhere closer to the 40%, or 40 kilos, increase in milk solids. In Clonakilty, and Brian will touch on in a minute, they have quite high levels of clover content, and because of the previous management in terms of the low organic matter on the grass-only swards, that's why there's such differences in quality that we haven't seen in Moore Park because of the previous management different. So I would imagine it's going to be closer to the 40 kilos milk solids rather than the 60 kilos that Brian has seen in Moore Park, but we will figure that out over the next number of years as well. In relation to the clover content dipping year on year, I think that was one of the next one, is it? In Moore Park, so we are currently going into our 5th year, and after 4 years, we haven't seen a large decrease in clover content so far, and we have swards ranging from the latest reseeded swards is 2013, so they're now going into their 4th year, and we have swards there since 2009 as well that are still averaging 20-22% clover content year on year. So we have seen quite a constant level of clover over the 4 years of the experiment so far. And Brian might just...
Yeah, so in Clonakilty we had extremely high levels of clover in 2014 and 15. So 2014, it's actually it's declined over the last 3 years. So from about 35-36% in 15 or 14 to about 26% in 15 and just under 20% this year in 2016 in Clonakilty. So it has started to decline. We've seen less of the problems with the lower clover content, which is beneficial, but it's going to be interesting. The swards are hitting, they'll be 5 years sown now this May, so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of a clover content we get in 2017. Then very briefly on the bloat issue, there's no real magic wand to wave to combat it, but I think I said it at the conference here last year, you have to prevent it is way better than trying to cure it. We have kind of identified a couple of risk factors that we look out for to know that these are the times where bloat are going to be an issue in terms of changing from non-clover swards to clover swards, going into very high clover content paddocks, on wet, damp mornings, low dry matter mornings, grazing very lush, green, grassy or kind of swards around April time when there's that bust of growth. They're kind of all high-risk times for bloat, so you have to have those kind of keys in your head to know that, right, there could be an issue here this morning, I need to do something to try and prevent bloat. We use the bloat oil as a preventative, works very well in dry weather, and then in terms of in wet weather, what we've started to do is giving the cows an initial kind of a 3-hour break in the paddock, and basically, so we use 24, 36-hour breaks in our paddocks. But what we'll do now is we'll put up a wire that'll basically do the cows for 3 hours. They'll have to eat what material is available to them in that break, grass and clover. We'll take up the wire, and for the rest of that grazing, then they'll graze across the whole paddock. And what they'll do is they'll take out the bits of clover here, there, and everywhere, and basically you're kind of taking off the edge of hunger off the cows and giving them a small bit of gut fill, and they'll graze away then for the next 2 grazings, 3 grazings, whatever, and there shouldn't really be an issue with bloat then. So basically managing bloat is all about, it is managing it, it's not leaving the cows in there and saying, oh, they'll be fine. You have to be aware that there are risks, and you have to be able to take the countermeasures to try and reduce the risk.
And just a follow-on point.
Lads, I'll have to cut it at that, because whatever about the edge on the cows, there's a serious hunger edge on the audience at this stage. Thank you, and I have to spend 5 minutes summarising each of what they said. Thanks a million for all of them. Tim, I'm very aware we didn't address the uptake of technology. And maybe it's something that should be, if there's a chance in the afternoon, there's a lot of good technologies out there. There's a lot we talked about today, and you asked a valid question. Where's the blockages for them going out on farms? We didn't address it. I'd just like to thank the whole team up here on behalf of you and Tom.